So for many of you, this is second nature to you. I don't think for 1 minute that I'm here to tell you all the elements of person-centered care planning. However, I do think there is a time to revisit this and have a look with some fresh eyes, particularly around the thoughts of citizenship. That's something that's been coming up just in the last sort of 18 months. What does it mean to live with dementia? Do you become any less of a person once you receive that diagnosis? If we think about the principles underpinning adults with incapacity, that idea that we must always use residual capacity, there is always a voice to be heard. How do we position that person? Do we make it possible for them to engage fully? If we think about some of the themes that we inspect upon around participation, sometimes we hear, you know, well, this person's got quite advanced dementia, they can no longer participate. We need to find a different way of communicating then. We need to find a different way of engaging with that person and no longer thinking that once somebody gets to a particular level, they haven't got anything to say, they haven't got any control over their environment. So again, it's just looking back, really thinking about valuing the person with dementia, treating them as an individual. I think the language has changed. I think, you know, we now do the SOFI as part of the inspections, where it's an observation tool. So if you're familiar with dementia care mapping, it's a little bit similar to that, developed by Bradford University. But it's very much looking at that individual. We're hearing less people talking about, she's a wanderer. I've got 2 feeders in the corner. Who's a double here? Now this kind of language was familiar a few years ago. You did hear that. You did hear staff talking, you know, oh, be careful, she's a biter. You know, it sounds really harsh now when you hear that, but it wasn't that long ago that we heard that kind of language used. Very much looking at the perspective of the person with dementia. I think that's really comes into play when we think about stress and distress, looking for those triggers that really drive why we're seeing agitation, why we're seeing somebody really upset. Not suddenly thinking that person's upset because of their dementia. We're saying, right, what's going on here? And that idea that there isn't a trigger, I think I can guarantee you there will always be a trigger. It might not always be obvious to us. We might not always be able to see it at first sight, but if we dig down, we'll find that trigger. And it might be an internal trigger. So it might be a hallucination, it might be a feeling of unease, it might not be something obvious within the environment. And supporting that person's social environment. So how do we position that person? You know, if we think about sometimes care at home when people very much maybe living with families, you know, you ask a question, are we looking to the family member to answer that, or are we looking actually to the person living with dementia to answer the question first? We might absolutely, we want to hear the family's perspective, but we always want to hear the person that we're supporting first and foremost. And I think that one comes in very much over what control people have of their environment, what control they have over maybe something as simple as choosing their key worker. How many times do we see key workers allocated to people rather than somebody choosing? And yet if you think about it, we choose the people that are important to us. Where do you sit when you go in to maybe to have your meal time? Do you get to choose where you sit? Do you get to have any say about new staff coming on? You know, we see some services where we're seeing people actually on the interview panel or being part of the process. So again, it's really thinking about where we position that person. We need to think about what's important to people and also what's important for people. And this is my example because I'm a salt fiend. So there are times when I love salt. There's certain things, boiled potatoes, can't eat them if they haven't really been boiled in salt. Salt in your porridge, it just makes it taste differently. However, if I started having my high blood pressure, then probably would have to do a bit of compromise in there. We'd probably switch to the low salt options and all the rest of it. So it is, with care planning, there is a balance to be struck. And there is that balance between what somebody really wants and what realistically is of benefit for them. and I hope Archie doesn't mind me sharing this thing, but you'll probably tell me if I am. But you were keen to do a Cresta run.
Yeah.
And that was getting looked into to do the Cresta run, and then the physical didn't quite work out.
No, it didn't, no.
So although that was really important to do, and there'll still be a big event, no doubt, we were discussing it last night. So if anybody's got any daredevil things that they can suggest to Archie, he's open up to all suggestions. However, it's got to be within some of the cardiac parameters. So it's getting that balance sometimes, and it is a bit of a compromise around care plans. And it is then about explaining the reasons why certain decisions come up. And again, I don't think we've always been very good about explaining why certain things can't be delivered, why we can't do certain things, why certain things that are a priority for one person can't actually fit in with the services around. We did this in Stornoway, Archie and I. That was the first one. And we're going to do have a conversation right now. We'll come up to the front here, and we're just going to have a conversation. And Archie is very happy to talk just about your own situation. Archie and I know each other very well. We've worked together now for well over a year. If we get to a question, if you're feeling like, oh, this is very personal, and Archie, you'll tell me if there's something you don't want to ask.
I certainly will, yeah.
Okay. And we do open it up to questions. Again, if you want to ask Archie a question as we go through, you'll say whether or not you're willing to answer it as we go through. All right. I don't know if you want to start off just by telling them your position in the Scottish Dementia Working Group.
Well, yeah, am I on? Is the mic on? Hello. Can you hear me? Well, that's the one drawback. Now, my name's Archie Noon. I've been diagnosed 2 years ago with vascular dementia. When I talk to you, I may suddenly just stop, just like that. I may lose it for a few seconds. I'll be lucky if I come back on the same tack as what I left it, but there you are. I've also got a thing called dyspraxia. I put the wrong words where I don't mean to put them. Nothing vulgar, I can assure you. And also, I stammer a bit, which I never used to do at all. But that's basically what I am, what's happened to me recently. And I have a tendency to make jokes, to bring humour into it. For me personally, I think it's very important that we have some humour, that we don't all sit very upright in our chairs and pay attention. It's not necessary. Just listen.
When did you get your diagnosis of dementia?
About 2 years ago, I got my diagnosis of dementia. It wasn't a pleasant experience to get my diagnosis. They came to my house and said, you've got vascular dementia. The lady was only in the house about 5 minutes, and she gave me a pack. She said, there you are, you can just read this pack and get all the information on it that you actually need. And away she went. That, to me, was devastating when that happened. When that person just said to me, you have dementia. And then, away they went. I said, that's not right. And I got a fright. I basically got a fright. I didn't move outside my wee house for 3 weeks. I just sat there, saying, what am I going to do next? And then I got a knock on the door, and there was a person called Wendy arrived from Alzheimer's Scotland. When Wendy arrived, she sat down with me, and she says, we've got to put strategies in, put things in place for you, so you can actually live a normal life, which I do to the best of my ability. And she took me down to the local centre in Dundee, and it was full of old people. They were all playing putting up in the hall and playing pool and all this. Not for me at all. Not for me at all. Then she mentioned the Scottish Dementia Working Group in Glasgow. I said, right, we'll go up and try that. And that was an eye-opener for me. It was brilliant. There was 19 of us around that table, and the agenda, I didn't know what the agenda was because it was my first meeting with them. And after lunch, we were having a laugh, we were having a joke. And there was somebody doing a clip, is that a clipboard you call it? Flip chart, a flip chart. And they were writing all down what we were talking about. Then at the end of it, she read it all back. And what we had been talking about in the morning session, we had inadvertently put on the flip chart. And there was the questions that we had, the questions that we asked were answered, but we weren't aware we were doing it.
I'm wondering how dementia's changed things, just from an everyday point of view, from getting up in the morning to, what does your day look like now?
Crawl out of bed. Notice that I don't jump out of bed. Crawl out of bed, and the first thing I'll think to myself, what day is it? Because sometimes I don't know what day it is. I have no idea. So I've just got to sit at the side of the bed and gather my thoughts. I'll get up, go to the kitchen. My kitchen is covered in post-it notes. What to do now? I wonder if I'm going to burn my porridge or not. It's things like that that most people sitting here take for granted. We don't. I've got post-it notes. This sounds crazy, have I flushed the loo? Well, sometimes I forget to flush the loo. Have I got all, excuse me. If I'm going out, have I got enough money for a taxi? Although I drive, I've got enough money for a taxi. Have I switched off the computer? Have I turned the taps off in the bathroom or in the kitchen? And all my appliances are on timers. Because if I don't do that, I'll put something on. I haven't got a stove as such, I've got a halogen cooker. And if I don't do that, if I didn't have the timer, I would burn everything in sight because I would just go away and forget about it. Just sit down, do something else, and it's completely blocked. But when the timer goes off, I say, my porridge is ready. And this is how I live my life. This is how I've got to live my life. And I don't mind. Because it makes life livable for me. I've got a little car which you may see in a few minutes, and I enjoy it. Now, when I first got diagnosed, they took my license from me automatically. And then after a year, my specialist said to me, would you like your license back? I said, don't be stupid, of course I would. And so I went to St Andrews, I had another test, and I passed it with flying colours. Doesn't that sound very bumptious? Yeah, passed it with flying colours. And then I went away and got my little car back again. And that's how dementia affects me daily. There's another thing about dementia and how it affects you is the fear of dementia. I don't know what I'm going to be like in 6 months from now. I may be absolutely gaga. I'm gaga now, but I may be absolutely gaga in six months' time. I've no idea. And we have no idea what's going to happen to us. So this is why, at the present moment, I'm pushing to get everything done that I want to get done. The Cresta Run, what I want to do is show people, I'll rephrase that, let people know if they have a diagnosis of dementia, it's not the end of the world.
Well, one of the things that you brought up there was about your fears. And I think that's probably something that's important to know about, particularly as your dementia may progress.
Yes.
Yep, is to think about what are some of your fears and what are the things that would help to ease those fears? Because I think that's important for people to know.
Having people round about you. I've got all the things in progress, the legal things I have to do. Power of attorney, I've already got that done. I've got 2 power of attorneys, one for my drugs and one for my house, and all that, and all the finance that's involved in that. But the fear of it, and I keep coming back to it, because I may wake up one morning and I don't know who I am. That's a catch-22 situation, because how can you wake up and don't know who you are if you're asking that question? And that is my biggest fear.